Welcome, guys. Tonight, we are going to break down our thoughts on the departure of Leslie Frazier and then dive into our free agent wish list on the offensive side. But first, our guys at Handsome Jack.
Broadcasting live to Bills Mafia Worldwide with Greg Tompsett and Aaron Quinn.
Welcome to the NFL. Doesn't matter what's happened before today. Today's a brand new day. It's a brand new season.
Your number one podcast for objective Buffalo Bills coverage. No matter where you are, we got you covered.
Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your host, Greg Tompsett, along with my partner in crime, Aaron Quinn. Aaron, welcome back from tropical locations.
It feels good to hear you back in my ear. That felt nice. Felt like home. Appreciate it.
You look a little bit tanner. You look rested.
I was going to say, I think I match you now in color, clothes. There was a couple weeks there this winter where after the show, I went back and watched, and I was like I was matching close to the shade of the background here with the white. It was not great for me. So a little bit of color. It started as a burn, and this is the end result of what was a pretty bad burn.
Yeah, well, your skincare matters, but I'm glad you guys had a great time. Welcome back. There's been a little bit going on, not until you did get back.
Yeah.
So on 3 separate occasions, I have assured you that, okay, well, now they're done with coaching changes. First, we hadn't really seen anything. We just had the departure of Jim Salgado as the safety coach, and then that happened, and then all of a sudden we had the move of Chad Hall as a lateral move down to Jacksonville, and then I assured you again, okay, well, now they're done with coaching changes, and then all of a sudden we have the departure of Leslie Frazier. It's something that we actually heard some whispers of, that it was a possibility, but that they were looking to keep him with the organization. That there was, obviously I think we all knew he really wanted that Chicago job last year. Then Matt Eberflus got, he was a member of the 85 Bears, would have been a perfect situation. The fact that they went out and got a kind of stoic, quiet, defensive-minded coach, but it wasn't him, I think was really a slap in the face. And now you see he's ready to step away for a year. And the way that it's been phrased is that he's taking a year off, but plans to return to coaching in 2024. I thought it was curious. The statement didn't say plans to return to the team, plans to return to the Bills. I don't know exactly what to take from it. I know you and I were both open to change, but I wasn't expecting it this week.
Yeah, I think this was an interesting one for me in terms of like trying to think back how exactly I felt when I heard the news, right? For me, this was not totally shocking. While this timing is pretty surprising, and when it's happening, I kind of just assumed the no news meant things were going to stay the same. I was kind of able to process it pretty quickly, having assumed that he would have left for a head coaching job over the last couple of years. Like that was a real threat that he would leave, or just his age, and that he would retire at some point. We talked about that multiple off seasons, and then maybe that was the path this year, that maybe, hey, he retires. I didn't see it as a step aside, but was prepared to lose Leslie Frazier in one form or another. So I've sort of braced for that idea all along. So it wasn't a surprise from that angle. And I do think, now that I think about it, we said we were kind of okay with it. I've praised Leslie Frazier. I do think he's a better coach than he maybe gets credit for. But I do think this relationship of Frazier running this defense has run course, and it needs something new. And I don't know that it needs an entirely new identity like maybe some people are speculating that it would. I think tweaks, maybe just a different set of eyes calling the plays, whatever that is, those minor tweaks. Now is the time to make that change. And now it's been forced on the Bills. They're going to have to do it. I think the interesting thing here, Greg, is we've had this conversation. I've praised Leslie Frazier a lot, but still at the end of the day, and you sort of even called this out in the chat the other day, of like, I don't really know how much influence the defense in terms of schematically game planning was Leslie Frazier or was Sean McDermott. Now we're going to know, right? We're going to find out how much Sean's involved and how much it was Leslie at the time. And if Leslie goes on to be a good defensive coordinator somewhere else, we'll see that too. It's sort of the Eric Bieniemy where he's been at here. Is it Andy Reid or is it Bieniemy? We're going to find out this year if it's Bieniemy. So that's probably the most interesting thing that I'm looking to take away from this is I'm not going to celebrate Leslie being gone. I think he's a good coach. I do think it's a substantial loss in terms of a good man in that building. But I'm really interested to see, like, is Sean McDermott going to take the reins of this defense? How much was is anything going to change if he does that? How much was his influence over this? Or was it Leslie Frazier's defense?
Yeah, there was maybe a 2-hour window where the announcement happened before press conferences. During that window, we were all, everybody going crazy. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they did this late after other defensive coordinators have been hired.
Right.
Who's still available? Could Jim Leonard, former Buffalo Bill? Some people were saying Rex Ryan, who interviewed for the Broncos job. Some up and coming names like Chris Kachurik, the defensive line coach for the 49ers, who's a really well thought of guy. Once the press conferences happened, I immediately went, oh, they're not hiring anyone from the outside. That was pretty clear to me in the press conference with Brandon Beane, and then reiterated, not as firmly, but reiterated with Sean McDermott. Now they hired Al Holcomb. I'm going to take Sean McDermott at his word. He said he's known about this for about a week.
Yeah.
I think that's a random thing to make up. Like, he said he knew about it. So lying about the time frame would be weird when he said, yeah, yes, I have known for a little bit. I've known for about a week. Well, they hired Al Holcomb 3 weeks ago.
Right.
Some people were trying to connect that dot to be like, oh, well, they knew about this and they hired Al Holcomb. And like, well, in the statement that came out announcing Leslie's, I'm not going to say resignation, him stepping away.
Right.
They announced Al Holcomb's title as senior defensive assistant. If it was, hey, some people speculated that, oh, you have to wait for the Rooney Rule, which you do. I don't know. Would they have just kept Holcomb's name off that sheet?
Yeah, there's no need to put it out there. Sure.
Wait on that. So some of those dot connecting things, I just don't know how necessary they are. As of right now, everything could change. I could look like an idiot. In 2 days, they wait. They do a couple interviews with outside candidates, and they name Al Holcomb the defense coordinator. As of right now, my sense is this is going to be one of those Patriots years where Belichick didn't name a defense coordinator. He made the play calls on defense, had guys whose jobs were to create the run game plan, the passing coordinating plan, to go through each of those setups, and that he called the plays on game day. That's my guess right now, is that, maybe we do see Al Holcomb as the run game coordinator on defense. Maybe we do see a Bobby Babich Jr. who's done, second safeties and now linebackers as a passing game coordinator on defense. Maybe it's John Butler. We have some good names. Eric Washington is the former defensive coordinator. I know nobody's high on him. By nobody, I mean me. Nobody's high on Eric Washington, but he is a former defensive coordinator. So those different pieces of it, my gut right now is I don't know if they're going to name any defensive coordinator. We might go into the season on paper without one.
I can see that. I think they will name one of these guys in internal within the names that you mentioned there.
That's not crazy at all.
Yeah.
But my gut right now is that they're not going to, but I won't be shocked at all if they do.
Steve from the Bills guys, Air 8 Hour, put up kind of a poll of who was going to be that play caller, and my vote was other, and that it's going to be one of these guys, but at Sean McDermott with a puppet, essentially, was what I was saying. And I think that either way, it could go the way you're saying, where nobody's officially named, or have somebody that is in place. But I do think Sean McDermott, and I'm kind of hoping, and I know that a lot of fans that may not agree with this, I'm kind of hoping that he takes over some of the reins. Like, if you are the mastermind that people say you are, and you have this experience, we see Andy Reid has an influence on that Kansas City offense. We know that. We don't know how much Bieniemy was putting into that also. I think comes into question. I kind of want him to have that control. If you're that guy on the defensive side of the ball, we know it's harder for defensive coaches. So have more influence, right? And trust that the offense is going to be okay and do their thing. I think it is time for that. So I think it works out well, and it forces the Bills' hand to come off of, if there's like a criticism and knock that I can have on this staff is their over patience at times. And I think Sean McDermott would have been totally happy to just roll back with Leslie Frazier again and keep going with this system as is. And this might force him to make some changes, getting more control himself.
So real quick, Walter, I'm not going to pick on you because many people hold the opinion that you do. It's factually incorrect. The statement here, Sean McDermott has been a poor to average in-game coach already, in his opinion. The thought of him now needing to call the defense as well potentially is frightening. It's factually incorrect. Virtually every metric shows he's above average to top 5 in timeout usage, fourth down decision making, 2-point conversion decision making, late game decision making, each of those scenarios. So the issue is our standard is perfection.
Yeah.
The problem is you don't realize how many other coaches are worse than him at the things you get frustrated with. And the answer to that is about 27 to 28 of them are worse than him in those things that frustrate you, because no one is perfect at those things.
Yeah.
No one bats 1,000 in those things. He is actually one of the better in-game coaches in every measurable statistic. But the perception is, oh, he's costing us games. He's a terrible in-game coach. What you can think is terrible, but the issue is 25 other coaches in the NFL are worse than that at what he does. So
it's the 3-game sample size, Greg, of the most devastating losses, which happened in the playoffs, happened in big spots, and they ended seasons where we didn't win the ultimate goal. And I get it. And I get the emotion behind it. I get where people become so frustrated that they say these things. But for me, you cannot take away even the conversation about Leslie Frazier. I think when you look at defensive coordinators over the last 5 years in the NFL, like he stacks up on par with all these guys. So this idea that it can't get any worse than a Leslie Frazier, guys like these guys can't make good in-game adjustments. I think there's no proof to back it up. They've had big stinker losses, but overall their body of work shows. Like the Bills defense, one of the best aspects of the Bills defense was all year we got on this show and talked about how, hey, they gave up that first drive. They got beat up and down the field on that first drive, but then they made in-game adjustments and got better. So that's not, I know it wasn't directly at Leslie Frazier, but I think this whole coaching staff there's valid criticism to throw their way, but some of the stuff of like, they're unwilling to make adjustments. They're unwilling to do these things. And there is just no proof of these over the top statements.
So the other part that's come up, and Eric shared some clips and a couple different stats that back this up. I think there's valid questions about, Sean McDermott was, pretty conservative on fourth downs, punting, 2-point conversions, late game situations early in his career. He brought in and has built up now one of the bigger analytics staffs in the NFL. And now he is at the top of all those metrics in what the analytics say you should do in those decision-making elements. To go into those on some of the different pieces of their usage and how they go through those things, those guys are still going to be in his ear. So they're feeding him the win probability, the likelihood of success, those different pieces. Those guys are still going to be there. So him going in to now call more defensive plays, which he's been a more aggressive defensive coach than Leslie Frazier in games where he took over the defensive game calling. He's more aggressive. When he was in Carolina, he was more aggressive. When he was in Philadelphia, he was more aggressive. Those different things, if that's what you want, that's what you might get here. He's a more aggressive coach than Leslie Frazier. Aggression doesn't equal success. The Eagles had the most aggressive defense in the NFL. They were second in all-time history in sacks in a season. They got lit on fire in the Super Bowl and couldn't do a thing. So just being aggressive isn't a magic answer for anything. But those scenarios, I think, are still very possible that if that's what you're looking for, we're not going to find out what Sean McDermott is capable of in calling a defense, because I do think he's going to be the one calling it. He's still going to have the guys in his ear that he's done the same improvement on those decision-making things. And now it's all in his lap. So if we, like you said, we kind of struggle to say, okay, how much is it McDermott's scheme, but those 60 to 70 decisions every game of what play call, when you blitz, when you switch coverages, when you do those different things. Leslie Frazier was making those decisions in the game. So now switching over that, okay, it's McDermott's scheme and he's the one making those decisions in the game. now it's all on him. All the pressure is there that we are now going to find out the full breadth of what he's capable of here, and can he manage that? And that, again, I'm not comparing him to Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick's one of the greatest coaches in NFL history. He had multiple of those Super Bowl seasons where they didn't have a defensive coordinator, and he was the one calling the plays, and they were able to make in-game decisions. So it certainly is
it
possible.
can definitely happen.
Andy Reid has done it, calling plays and making in-game decisions in great seasons.
Yeah, for sure. One thing here, maybe before we move on, is this new surprise. Does it change the need to get Tremaine Edmonds back in free agency? Like, if Sean McDermott now has more say over this defense, do you think he wants to roll in with a new middle linebacker and maybe a new safety in place of Jordan Poyer? Or does it become more of a priority with that your head coach now taking it over, maybe potentially?
Yeah. I think that's fair. I could see. I'm undecided if it changes that. It was already obviously a pretty big priority.
Right.
I think it reinforces that. But yeah, maybe it does. Maybe there is a notch that it can go up a little bit more in just having that one more steadying force. The guy who was the play, the captain reciting the plays on the field. Maybe that would be a little easier, but I have a feeling he was already a pretty big priority with them as it was. And I think some of the comments from Bean reinforce that.
Yeah, and also Sean, they both spoke super highly of him. Made me feel better about my take. So with that said, we can talk some free agency.
Yeah, I think it's time to switch over. We'll see where that goes. I don't know how much else there's going to be here, but now we'll have some fun. So anyone last week who watched our salary cap extravaganza, I hope you had fun. We certainly had a lot of fun preparing for that. We ended up coming up with $50 million in cap space. That was after the $16.5 million hole. So we created $65.5 million. I told people we could go all the way up to 80. So technically we could create $95 million if we flipped every switch and pulled every lever. They're obviously not going to do that. We were even pretty aggressive. So I'm going to take it back a little bit and assume that we are operating with, I think it's going to be pretty standard that we have about $35 million in cap space. A little bit of that we're going to carve away for the draft class and for in-game decision making. I think 25 to 30 million in usable cap space is feasible. We're not talking about retaining our own guys on this show. I've put out contract projections. Even if we keep Tremaine Edmonds for a monster 6-year, $100 million deal, you can still get to the idea of that being about a $7 million cap hit. So we could keep Tremaine Edmonds and have another $20 million to spend. Right. We could keep Tremaine Edmonds and Jordan Poyer and still have another $15 million to spend.
And Bobby Hart. Yeah.
And critical players like Bobby Hart to be able to bring back. So what we're going to do is go through each of the offensive position groups. And you had an awesome analogy that really struck with me was you I won't say the name, but you picked out one of your guys and says, my Goldilocks guy is this. And it was the idea of like, oh, this guy is too old or this guy is too expensive, but this guy's just right. And
like maybe not my right man. I think this is where we're at right now in the where we're up against the cap. I'm not a big believer in the cap. I think there's some mythical nature to it, but there is some reality of what they're going to be able to spend and add to an already really good roster. Right. And so I've had to dial back from where I've been previously at free agency, where it is more of a wish list because there's some names that I can think we could wish for, where now it's like, okay, maybe this isn't my favorite player, but it makes the most sense, right? Like, I think that's where the Bills are going to be operating mostly here throughout the free agency. Although people will come at me, we said they weren't going to make any big splash moves last year, and they ended up with Von Miller. There is a chance Brandon Beane dips into some future asset or something crazy and does something wild that we're not expecting. But I think it is going to have to be a lot of Goldilocks type spots for this team.
You just like thrift shopping and you wanted to be able
I want to find unique good deals that somebody else has gotten rid of.
Yeah. So we're gonna jump right into it. We know where you guys have the most excitement and the position that you want us to start with. We're gonna start right out with wide
running
receivers.
Back 3.
RB3.
No.
So we're gonna start with wide receivers. I think we both have this as one of our biggest needs. Don't read into tonight. There are multiple positions where I'll make some comments where the draft is a huge part of what
Yeah.
we need. I want draft picks at multiple spots that I'm going to advocate for tonight because I want both. I want a wide receiver draft pick and a wide receiver signing. I want offensive line draft picks and an offensive line signing. We'll get into that. Tonight is about free agents. I will let you lead off here. Who is, maybe ease us into it, who are some you considered but is not your number one pick?
So, first of all, I want to get one out of the way. Byron Pringle was a guy recently that was on our free agent target list. Eric and Anthony did a great job breaking that down in the need. I think that still is exactly the same as it was last year, and I talked about it on our free agent. I think you can go there. He was a guy that's in there. But some of the guys I sort of pinpointed for this process, obviously, I got on Spaces while I was in Hawaii, talked to you about Robert Woods got released. I think where this makes sense is released players in the comp pick formula of trying to get a guy that has been released. If we're losing some guys, the idea of maybe if they lose out on Tremaine. For Robert Woods, it feels too expensive, right? Like, even if, because he's a cut guy, I think there's going to be a better market for him. I think he immediately becomes top 3 wide receiver in this free agency class. Not a great class. I think there's a lot of value still in what he provides that necessarily a lot of fans don't see, the blocking, being a good route runner. Some team's going to overpay for that than what the Bills can do for the role that they're looking for. Obviously, looking at Jamison Crowder, Cole Beasley, also probably too old here on this list. I don't want to bring them back with injury history with Jamison Crowder hitting 30 years old in this season. Just doesn't make sense for me. Guy that was real close to being just right for me, and I know Eric has been in on him, is Olamide Zaccheaus, I think is how you say it. Falcons, 25 years old, has shown flashes, kind of a disaster offense in Atlanta, so you don't really know what to make out of the production. I think that you could get something out of that, and he fits the role that I'm looking for in that 4th wide receiver type role. I think you maybe reset the Isaiah McKenzie, some real wide receiver ability to it. That could be one, but the one I landed on, some special teams ability. Since I can't have Greg Dortch because you won't let me do that, you only talk about Greg Dortch. That would be my sweet spot.
I'll give you some good news. They have not tendered him yet. So if they don't tender him, he will leap up the list for me as well.
Yeah.
While he's a restricted free agent, we saw what happened last year with Ryan Bates.
Yeah.
It's a fruitless effort. You have to create some crazy contract for the other team not to match it. And in this scenario, we're going up against a team with more cap space than us. So it's really hard for us to design a contract that makes sense for us that they also won't match.
But with a new coaching staff, you don't know how they feel.
So
like,
that's our
chance.
If they don't tender him, 100%, he leaps up this list.
He that is my sweet spot. If it becomes available, I think it's perfect for the wide receiver 4 role that I want. But somebody just talked about it here. I'd be looking at Paris Campbell. That is where it falls for my Goldilocks here for the wide receiver room. I think it's just right. PFF has him as the 83rd best free agent on this list. Again, 25, 26 years old. There's still some possibility that he's going to meet the draft grade of a round 2 pick that he got. It has a 9.76 RAS score when he came out of college. Like, I know he struggled with injuries since he got into the pros.
Played with some pretty poor quarterbacks.
A very bad quarterback situation in Indy. I think that devalued him as well as the injury. So you're buying at the right time, I think, if he can ascend and get back to where he was. So I think it's a great opportunity to buy into a player that had high traits, comes from a school that has put out many good wide receivers. Most people had him graded higher than Terry McLaurin in that draft. He obviously got drafted ahead of McLaurin. There is tape for him to show that he can be an explosive, productive player. He can do that Isaiah McKenzie role and more if he can stay healthy. I think you can buy into that, knowing that this would be for like that wide receiver 3-4 role potentially.
I like it a lot. I think that he absolutely is in. He wasn't my Goldilocks, but he was right there. I'm actually nervous that the chat is a good indication of NFL front offices. When everyone thinks a guy is the best value, he's not going to be a value.
Sure.
When everyone thinks, oh, this is the guy I can get for cheap, and everyone thinks that, he's going to get more money than what we think.
Than we believe.
So if the numbers are right, and I would have him around 7 to 7.5 million, you can hide some of that. We can do 3 years, 21 million, 21.5, 22.5. And you can have the first year cap hit be like 3.5, 4 million. Everybody's happy. He gets his money. The problem is, if everybody's excited about him, maybe he's a 10 or $12 million guy. And then all of a sudden I'm not excited. I don't want to go that route. You mentioned Robert Woods. I think it's silly for us to think he's not a possibility. He checks so many boxes of what we want. And I think some fans, he was playing in a disastrous offense in Tennessee. Just go back one more year, and the previous 4 years in a row, he was 86 to 95 catches every single year in LA. Looked great as a piece of an offense. I still think he has some of that football
and
left
ACL
in
injuries
him.
take time. Like,
Yeah.
he came back and played fine, but I would expect him to be healthier, right, in this next season.
Horrible quarterback situation, terrible offense. I would not read much into last year, and he still played a lot last year. You mentioned Olamide Zaccheaus. I think he's one. Eric's also a big fan of Richie James. Those are two guys you'll see more about with Robert Woods, Zaccheaus, and Richie James. Eric and Anthony will be breaking down some of those guys next week, so check out the film room. I'm going to throw out a couple other names that just because we hired Adam Henry as our wide receiver coach, it's naive to think that Odell Beckham Jr. or Jarvis Landry aren't possibilities. He has connections with both those guys at LSU and with the Browns. I think those are possibilities. They're not my Goldilocks. I narrowed in on a guy right there with Paris Campbell, but that I'm kind of hoping we can sneak a little bit of a discount because a little bit of the shine was off of him because of a groin injury this past year. I want Mecole Hardman. He has special teams ability to return the ball. They give him a bunch of carries on jet sweeps. He, which by the way, Robert Woods had like 20 plus carries every year on those jet sweeps in LA. That's another sneaky one. Hardman has that inside outside flexibility. He's done about 50% of snaps in the slot, 50% on the outside. I think we might be able to sneak him for like $6 or $7 million as well. I don't think he's going to get a ton of money. So he's mine. I would be ecstatic if we got Paris Campbell. I think Paris Campbell, they're both 25. They both have high athleticism. They both have a lot of speed. I want inside outside flexibility. Woods, Hardman, and Campbell all have that. Richie James has that. Zaccheaus has that. We're looking for guys who can play in the slot but can also play outside. I want a dynamic guy in the draft. I want both. I want one of these free agents and a high draft pick, a top 2-round draft pick. If I can have some combination like that, I think we can really, really turbocharge this receiving group where we still have Gabe Davis, but we're not depending on him for as much. We still have Khalil Shakir, but we're not depending on him as much. You have 4 or 5 guys who can all contribute and do those things. Nikki's question here, can Hardman stay healthy? That's absolutely
Campbell's got the same
question. Yeah, all those guys have questions. And prior to this year, he had stayed healthy. Mecole Hardman had a nice run of decent health. But this year, that's also why we could get a discount on him.
That's what I was going to say here, too, is like where you're trying to find discounts. There's a reason you're buying in on guys and that their value, you're buying in on low value, is you're assuming maybe some of those were freak things and weren't necessarily injuries that you would worry about the trends of them. Or that
and FYI, he had never missed a game in his career before this year.
Yeah,
he had played every game in the first 3 games, 16, 16, 17. He had played every single game in the first 3 years of his career. This was the first year he ever missed a single game.
Yeah. Yeah, it says in Jamison Crowder. But anyways.
So for our wide receivers, so our 2 choices there, we mentioned Robert Woods, we mentioned Richie James, we mentioned Olamide Zaccheaus, but you went with Paris Campbell. I went with Mecole Hardman at wide receiver.
Greg Dortch, 1B, 1AB / maybe.
Like when they have those conditional picks
yes,
in the draft, like, well, if this happens, you don't get to get him, and it goes through those conditions for it.
To be determined.
Yeah, so you'll hear more about those next week in the film room. I'm going to lead off here for our next one. Our next position is going to be interior offensive line. So I don't think we're going to splurge anywhere in free agency. If we're going to go a little bit on the higher end, I think 8, 9, 10 million is possible. You can play with some numbers. A spot that you can splurge a little bit and get some immediate impact. We saw what Brandon Scherf did in his signing. We saw what Joe Tooney did going to Kansas City. We've seen some of these guys plug in and make a difference. I don't know that we're going to be at the absolute high end of it. Isaac Seumalo out of Philadelphia, I think, is going to have a bit of a bidding war. And I'm nervous some of these other names are also going to. So you're going to hear about Ben Powers and Dalton Reisner. I think they're 26, 27 years old. you're going to have the potential for a bidding war. I would love Seumalo. I would love Powers. I would love Reisner. I would take any of them. They would absolutely be right there for my choices if we can get them in single digits. Once it goes into double digits, I'm not sure I want to play in those waters. If we can get one of them for 9, 8.5, something like that, I will make that contract work. I would absolutely plug them right in at right guard. Having a guy like Powers or Reisner can help settle things down for Spencer Brown. We saw that Bates was better on the other side. You have Ike Bacher being able to be back there. I'd feel better about our offensive line immediately. We'll get to the draft. I also want to tackle in the draft to compete with Spencer Brown, but we'll talk about that. My Goldilocks is that next tier down. We've seen some names in the chat already. Will Hernandez is one of them. I went with Ron Beck's guy here, Nate Davis. That was my choice for my Goldilocks. He's 26. Eric was a huge fan of him. I got to watch him at the Senior Bowl I went down to back pre-COVID in 2020 out of Charlotte. A guy that has some strong ability. And I think because of having those other 3 or 4 guys up above him, getting those big bids back and forth, maybe we could sneak him for 6.5, $7 million, a little bit less. I think Hernandez would be one notch below there. Davis has been a little bit more consistent. Hernandez was pretty bad in New York and then was good in Arizona. And I don't know quite what to make of that, but I'm open to it. So Hernandez would be down there 3.5, $4 million for me as, maybe a plug kind of guy. But my choice would be Nate Davis. If we have a chance to be able to bring in a guy like him, 26 years old, because they'll give him a 4 or 5 year deal and feel good about it. He's a guy I think we could plug in as a starter. Again, I'd love if we get one of the better guys, but kind of that value shopping, he'd be my choice.
Yeah, I actually don't have much different to add. All these guys that you talked about are really all the guys that I was going to highlight tonight as well. I'm interested to see how these values play out because to me, in my evaluation of free agency, I don't have actually a substantial difference between Reisner, Powers, Davis, and Hernandez. I liked them all similarly in their draft prospects. I think that some have had a little more consistency, like you said, and some have come on a little bit stronger lately. So it's hard to.
That's one. I think Powers has a lot of attention right now because his metrics in his pass rush efficiency are really, really good. Spiked. He wasn't good for the first couple of years of it.
Hernandez is the same. Correct. He spiked here over the last year. Reisner has been a little more consistent, but never really had any spikes in any of his play. And Davis has just sort of gone along and done his work consistently. And so I'm interested to see how the values play out and who buys into what here. And I think for me, it becomes, we talk about it a lot and we'll talk about it again, I think with the quarterback room, who loses this game of musical chairs. For me, I'm okay with, because I think it's going to be an upgrade at the guard position. And this is one of those positions, like you said, that I really do want to attack aggressively in the draft as well. So this is getting something that is a stopgap. We can get a starter right now at right guard to get to have an immediate improvement. I think any one of these guys will do it. So I'm landing on, this is where we came up with Goldilocks as well, was Nate Davis was that Goldilocks in terms of, I think there's still a lot of meat on the bone. I think he's young enough to continue to develop under Cromer, and I think that you can get a really good starter here. And I think Hernandez, for me, matches that. I think that for me, they're both sort of in that exact range where either one of them I'd be happy with as a Goldilocks type candidate.
Yeah, I'm curious because I think there's a possibility here where you can do both. We'll talk about it in our draft shows. I want one of those like Eric Wood type picks who can be a guard initially, but can be a long-term center. I don't need that draft pick guy to start day one. I'm okay with them being a developmental guy behind it. Every draft pick's not going to start. I'd like to sign a starting guard and a guy who can step right in here.
I'm assuming Ike Bacher is going to be back too. Like, but I don't assume that's going to be your starter. I think you bring him back as a rotational piece.
I also think he's going to be really cheap, almost a minimum deal, just because he's missed a season and a half.
I could see the Bills like sticking with Saffold. I think it's too old. I don't want anything to do with it. I don't. I think that there's a non-zero chance that
I had some static in my headphones. I didn't hear what you said the last 30 seconds.
I don't love
it. I'll be mad. I'll be outright mad if they bring back Roger Saffold. I will be angry. But again, he was a Pro Bowler, so
can't lie. Pro Bowl don't lie.
So next, I'll let you lead off here. I don't think we're going to, matter of fact, I know we're not going to spend at the high end for tackle because they're not out on Spencer Brown, and we shouldn't be out on Spencer Brown. Spencer Brown had elite athletic profile. He tried to play through a back injury last year, had flashes again. We should not be looking to immediately demote Spencer Brown. We should be adding competition, which competition is not going and signing Mike McGlinchey or Orlando Brown or some like $15-20 million tackle. Competition, in my opinion, could come in a top 3 round draft pick. But I do think you could add it in free agency. What was your approach at tackle?
I don't like this tackle class, to be totally honest with you.
It's top heavy and then a big drop off.
And if you go through like the PFF, I don't love PFF grades, but their list of top 100 free agents, man, I'm not even really looking at Bills free agents in like the top 40 of their list. Like those players that are in the top whatever of their position. Tremaine Edmonds would be the only one for me. Everyone else is honestly, I just don't think the Bills are there. They're going to try to fill holes here in free agency, create competition, and draft some of these guys to come in. Where I fell, I think a lot of fans have talked about Luwan getting cut and being available. I think that's washed. I know he grades out pretty well, but I have seen a drop off there. I think that his name probably holds more weight than his play does at this point. I don't think that's a good way to buy in an asset, and I think someone will pay him. Isaiah Wynn's a tough one for me to gauge a value on because there's been some inconsistency. I just see him ending up back with the Patriots. I don't see him having a huge market. That's a tough one for me. Where I settled, and this would probably be a little bit more of an investment than we're thinking, and I think he would be able to take the starting job right away. Would be Jermaine I can't say his last name. Luminor. I think
my number 2. He was my number 2.
I think this would be one that would come in and push for that starting job right away, and maybe take some pressure off drafting this year. Even though I still
played 4 out of the 5 positions.
Yeah, it can go swing tackle. Played 800 snaps last year at right tackle, so he's got experience at right tackle. Kind of bounced around a 5th round draft pick. Like he's got the right size. Not quite 30 years old. He's still got a few years here where you could get good starting years out of a prime guy. 28. I think you probably get 2-3 years if he becomes your starter and kind of take a little pressure off of having to fix it right now. I do think there might be, again, that you having him on this list, maybe that it's not as much of a deal as we think that he will be, and it would be more on the high end of this market.
Yeah. So I was right there. He was my number 2. My Goldilocks was a guy right next to him, Cameron Fleming, who was there with Denver. Same idea, positional flexibility, has played 4 out of the 5 positions, has starts at both tackle, both right and left tackle, both guard spots. Illuminor has starts at 4 out of the 5 positions, both guard spots, both tackles. That's the kind of guy I want to add. I think they're both $2.5-3.5 million guys. They're more valuable than Quessenberry was last year, where it was like almost a minimum deal. I think we spend a little bit more, that if he goes down, we have somebody we could trust a little bit more, or is not out of the question, could beat out Spencer Brown in camp.
I think they'll bring back Quessenberry. That's my gut.
Sure. I think it's also possible. Well, so I think you can bring back Quessenberry, but you don't give him a guaranteed deal. Like he has to make the roster. It would be him versus Tommy Doyle for that extra spot, in my opinion. So we'll see here. I would like it to be Cameron Fleming, but I'd love it if it was Jermaine Illuminor. Either one of those 2 guys, I think would be right there and be totally doable.
This exercise stunk for me, Greg, because I wanted, because I'm the protect Josh Allen, that's my thing. I wanted to come in here and like spend some good money and get really excited about it. But I do think I just have a gut feeling that specifically on the offensive line in free agency, run it back is going to be the theme. And
don't worry,
it doesn't feel good.
I'm going to anger. There's a lot of folks in the chat doing a great job. One like Amicus here, that everybody's going to want flashy toys in the draft. If we started the draft with a tackle, a guard, and a center as the first 3 picks, I'd be totally fine with it. So I'm going to rain in a bunch of people's parade when draft time comes.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, next one. This is one that is, I could leave or take. Our next position is running back. There are a lot of names in free agency, one of which is Devin Singletary. I think it's silly to think there's not a possibility he could come back. There's also a ton of higher end names with Josh Jacobs and Saquon Barkley and Kareem Hunt and like some flashy names in free agency.
Mm-hmm.
Because of how many flashy names there are, there's a next tier of free agent running backs that might be really cheap that I would be totally fine if we don't sign a single free agent running back. We just draft a thumper in the 5th round and Nyheim Hines, James Cook, and the thumper is our backfield, and that's it. And we're totally good. But just for this exercise, I did play around a little bit. And yeah, Alexander Mattison is one of my 3. Like, he's not my Goldilocks, but he was right there. I assumed for a year and a half that Alexander Mattison was going to be this huge home run signing this offseason. I don't know if you remember back a long time ago, Michael Turner was like the sneaky backup to LaDainian Tomlinson forever. And then it like kept coming up and like, oh, he's going to be the free agent. And then he got the bag from Atlanta. I was like, oh, it's going to be Alexander Mattison. Everybody's seen him be a starting caliber guy like Kareem Hunt was with Chubb behind Delvin Cook. And he's going to go get the bag this year. And somebody's going to pay him a ton of money. And then all of a sudden there's 10 free agent running backs in the year that he was going to get his bag. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, I think Spot Track's crazy that his value is 2.2 million. Oh, shut up, sir. I think it's crazy that it's that number, but if it is, I'll pay Alexander Mattison 2.2 million. Like, all right. Same thing. Dearness Johnson is another guy that I thought was kind of hidden behind Chubb and Kareem Hunt, and that he has some value. Matthew has my guy. My Goldilocks is if we're going to sign someone, we could cut out needing to use that 5th round pick on Mohamed Ibrahim or some thumper. Deontay Foreman is a jackhammer. Deontay Foreman is TJ Maxx Derrick Henry. He's thrift stop Derrick Henry. That dude's a jackhammer. Go give him $2.5-3 million to be that jackhammer, to be that short yardage guy. Deontay Foreman is like new school Brandon Jacobs. He's a huge, powerful running back. He would fit perfect with Hines and Cook. I don't want to spend money. I'm not giving anybody more than $2.5-3 million. But because of how depressed some of these numbers are going to be, because there's so many free agents, I'm open to some of these guys who are 25, 26, 27 on a 1 or 2 year deal at $2.5 or $3 million. I'd be okay with it. So I went into this assuming that my answer was going to be, I literally don't want anybody. I only want a cheap draft pick and let's move on. But there might be some talent that's so cheap that maybe we could bring somebody in.
Sure. I don't hate the idea. I got in here. First thing I saw was Kenyon Drake. I've always wanted him, but he's too old, right? That's it's a too old one at this point, but God, I love Kenyon Drake and I wanted him right here. It's like that Duke Johnson where nobody has known how to use him right, but maybe he's just not the guy I think he is. There's part of me that wants a scenario. We were talking on Spaces again last week and having this conversation about what to do with Nyheim Hines' contract and how does that play out? And I don't know if you caught last week. We kind of debated it on the panel.
I think it's most likely that we reduce it because we didn't use him last year. So you could set some very achievable, not likely to be earned incentives that he and his team know he could earn back, where we could make his cap hit like 2.5 million, but he knows he could earn up to 5 million. We'll deal with that in 2024. The panel outvoted me 3-1. So I agreed with them and said, okay, I do think it's more likely that we release him than we keep him at 4.8. I don't think we're going to keep him at 4.8 million. I think either you restructure it or you release him or trade him. So I went with release him. I actually think it's more likely we keep him, but at a reduced number.
If we trade him, could we get Kareem Hunt in here? Is a guy that I've been I think that would be maybe an upgrade and use of the type of currency that we're talking about using in this room. But without that type of move and assuming that it's a getting Hines back at a reduced rate, I think that would be fun. It'd be a lot of fun, right? And I get it. I'm going to preface this with I understand why people hate when I bring up Kareem Hunt, and I understand why people hate him and wouldn't want to cheer for him.
Sure.
On field, it's hard for me to not get excited about the kind of running back he is in this offense. It's kind of everything I've always ever wanted. It's what I saw from James Cook that I think can be part of this offense. So you can't stop me from wanting that on field. No matter what, my brain twists and I just want things that I like. Where I landed here, though, I think that's too expensive in the idea that if we are keeping Hines and there's just not enough touches for all the guys that I like in that scenario. Devin Singletary is really in that sweet spot
Yep.
The problem for me with Singletary is I don't know that it's a weird situation to have him come back as running back 3. And that is where I'm at in that relationship. And I don't know how that feels having a guy. I don't know if he can be that kind of player to check his ego and do that. Maybe he can. I think it would probably be best for him to go have a new start to the next part of his career. So I landed on a guy that was a free agent target for us. Eric was really high on him last year. Justin Jackson ended up in Detroit, kind of got lost in the shuffle in Detroit and what ended up being a very good offense and a very good running offense. And I think I think you would be buying in low on a guy that could come in and just be your running back 3 and be a consistent running back 3 and take over some snaps if needed in case of injury, but just be a consistent presence in there that isn't really going to necessarily come in and push for touches. Cause I do want Cook and Hines to be a real big part of this offense.
Yeah. So I want to preface everything here. I want James Cook at 50% plus of the backfield next year, no matter what.
Yeah.
Now, if we released or traded Nyheim Hines and brought in Kareem Hunt, I'd be okay with those two having 50-50.
Both on the field,
each having half of a you wouldn't tip your hand. Both of them are great receiving backs. Both of them are good running backs. I wouldn't hate that.
Pie in the sky scenario for me in this running back room.
I won't lie. I don't think James Cook plus Alexander Mattison is terribly different than that. Madison has a great missed tackle rate. He's had a great breakaway rates in previous years. He's a good receiver out of the backfield. I don't think Cook plus Madison or Cook plus Hunt is terribly different.
But with Hines feels redundant, right? Like
correct, right? It would be instead. It would be instead of Hines. You wouldn't do that. If you did Hines, it would be my path where you would either draft a Mohamed Ibrahim type or sign a Deontay Foreman type. Because you want that jackhammer guy in the backfield, but you wouldn't have it there. So I don't expect. I'm pretty sure we're not spending big at running back, but I don't think it's crazy that we bring in somebody with a name at some point there.
Sure.
All right, I'll let you lead off this next one. We
go
from running back to tight end.
Tight end's a tough one for me because I'm in a spot where I want more 2 tight end looks. Like I want to be able to.
You mean we're not? How about this? Are we finally going to sign a tight end that makes the roster? Because we've now done 3 years in a row,
right,
where we've signed a free agent tight end who then couldn't make the freaking roster. The last two, OJ Howard, and the year before with Jake Seahawks guy.
Oh my God,
what's his name?
Yeah,
Jacobs.
Something. No. Anyways,
Jacob.
Yeah, okay. I don't know.
Hollister. Jacob
Hollister.
Who's gonna make me crazy?
Chris Kepner, our producer, gave us that. Yeah, no. Josh Allen's boy.
It's important Chris knows I thought of it before I read his chat.
Yeah, right. So on this tight end room, it's tough because I want a starter to come in and have more of that 2 tight end set. I would love Morris to be that guy. I think that he's shown flashes of the athleticism that I'd be looking for.
I'm open to him.
But hope's not a plan. But I would like that to work out. I do think
he did beat out OJ Howard this year. He's the reason we cut OJ Howard.
I'm not sure the guy I landed on would beat him out and make the team again. But I just think that's where the Bills are at, unfortunately. And the investments just seem weird. I think this is a really kind of Goldilocks position. I would love Mike Gesicki. Like that would be fantastic if we could find a way to get Mike Gesicki, and that value is just not there. I don't think
stuck with my bit. I should have stuck with my bit and listed him in the receivers.
Yeah, honestly, but I don't think McDaniel ruined his value enough league wide where somebody's not going to buy in on that talent.
I think his $8 million projection is pretty close.
Yeah, Evan Ingram would have been cool to get when the Bills were in on him last year. I think that worked out really well for Jacksonville.
Yeah, if we could have bought cheap on him, that would have been cool.
Yeah, that cheap sale, I think, has sailed now. I think.
He's going to get double digits.
He will get paid well from them. I think it's a big part of what they're doing. I think some of the targets that I sort of landed on in the just right would be like a Drew Sample.
That's not a terrible. Drew Sample was I didn't put him on my list, but I looked at him. Jody Fortson was the same. I didn't put him on my list, but I wouldn't be shocked.
Drew Sample's not going to move the needle for you alive.
Drew Sample's not a guaranteed to make the roster.
Yeah, good blocking. It would not be fantastic. I landed on for my just right Dan Arnold. Again, another guy we had as a free agent target previously. I don't think anything changes there for him. He didn't stick.
We were rumored to be in on him, weren't we?
There was rumored to be on him. Eric talked about that he fit a lot of the archetype for the Bills at the tight end position. 27 years old. He will be 28 here this season. 6'6", 220 pounds. Again, I think there's a chance he does not push and get a spot on this roster, but I think this is where the Bills are at for the tight end, and hopefully you get somebody that sticks enough to run some two tight end sets.
Yeah,
An upgrade over Tommy Sweeney, I think, is what we're all looking for.
Correct. So I think Peter had the comment. We paid Dawson Knox. That's our big chunk of money at tight end.
I just want more Dawson Knox in this offense. Yeah,
right. We're not going to do a Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith situation here where they were running 50% plus tight end two tight end 12 personnel. We're not going to be doing that. I will argue. It's not. I'm not joking. Mike Gesicki is a wide receiver. He is not a tight end in any sense. He never puts his hand in the ground. He is a big slot receiver. So if we want him to be the slot receiver, and because he's labeled as a tight end, he's cheaper than other slot receivers. Okay, I'll listen to that. I don't expect that. So I was poking around in the bargain bin, and I think Foster Moreau played too well with Darren Waller out. He would have been one that I liked.
He was right there.
He's going to be too expensive. Hayden Hurst, I think, played too well for Cincinnati. He's going to get paid starting tight end,
and he's hitting that 30-year-old mark here.
One older guy who is going to be a cap casualty for Washington is Logan Thomas. Maybe we get a redo on a guy that we probably should have found a way to keep a while ago before he left. If he gets released, he made a good amount of money in Washington. Maybe he's okay trying to sign with a talented championship caliber team, wants to go back hometown style. So Logan Thomas, I think, is a not crazy one that if that number comes down below 5 and we're talking 3 or 4 million, maybe. And again, I think Foster Moreau is above there. I think the other names, the one I settled on was Donald Parham. Donald Parham, 6'8", 257, big monster of a guy. Everybody remembers. They see him in the Chargers in Los Angeles because you can't miss him when he's on the field. He's a monster of a human. 25 years old, pretty good blocker, good red zone. He's the kind of guy I'm looking for that's different, because Quentin Morris is more of a Charles Clay. Heck, Quentin Morris is closer to Reggie Gilliam than he is to Dawson Knox. He's more of a move tight end, H-back type. I like him. I want him on the roster. He plays special teams. He can do things. He's not your stereotypical hand in the dirt, 2 tight end guy. Donald Parham's that guy. 6'8", 257, can catch the play actions in the red zone, can block a little bit. I think is probably a slight notch above some of the other guys. He probably would be a guy that would have a little bit of guaranteed money and likely would make the roster. But if we were going to spend a little bit there, I'd be okay with it. And I'd be fine if we go into next year with Quentin Morris on the minimum deal, Donald Parham for $2 million, $2.5 million, and then Dawson Knox. That's a perfectly fine, logical tight end room. I think that's a possibility to be able to go through. So I think we're both in that same ballpark of somebody cheaper, not somebody that's an absolute lock, but that ballpark of things.
And until we utilize Dawson Knox, right? None of this.
Correct. Yeah. We got one tight end we got to figure out, let alone 12 personnel and 2 tight ends. We'll close it out with obviously the most important position here. Who is Josh Allen's caddy this summer? Matt Barkley has already been re-signed. I was curious, Matt Barkley was given $263,000 in guaranteed money, which is basically his, hey, we're not going to keep you on the roster, but when we release you, if you take the practice squad money plus the $263,000 we gave you, it's kind of like being on the roster. They literally gave him, that's more guaranteed money than like David Questenberry got. That's more guaranteed money than Bobby Hart, guys who made this roster. So they gave him that money basically as, hey, Josh really likes you. You're a perfectly good QB3. You're not going to be on the roster, but we'll give you that money to hang out on the practice squad and be our extra guy. So we're actually consciously eating $0.263 million, $263,000 in dead cap that we know we're not going to keep just because we're going to give that money to Matt Barkley as a thank you for being Josh's literal caddy on the golf course.
And I think there's more to it for the Barclays too. We heard
Yeah.
like Barclays' wife is like the leader of the welcome committee and stuff. We just saw the Players Association grades on how
The Bills
families are
organization
treated,
graded really well, A+, I think, in that
with
area.
family and stuff like that. And they at least talk about prioritizing that stuff. And I think they will overpay for that type of person to be in the building. And if it makes Josh happy and it makes everybody happy and it's a positive influence on the building, they're going to do that. There's a lot of potentials for caddies. There's a lot of Josh Allen's friends sitting out here.
I had a hard time trimming it to 4. I have 4 names on my list, and I had a hard time making it 4.
There's a lot of Josh's buddies. This sucks for me. I don't care. If these guys are any significant amount of playing time, everything's gone wrong, and I'm miserable. I'm now finally miserable, like the people want me to be on Twitter. So yeah, what you're looking for out of this group is steer the ship so it doesn't totally collapse for a week or two if needed. If Josh hurts his elbow in that scenario and he had to sit 2 to 3 weeks to
all
rest,
of them are huge downgrades from Josh Allen. How much of a downgrade you are doesn't really matter.
Yeah, and we've seen really successful teams have pretty basic bad backup quarterback.
Chad Henne's pretty bad.
Brandon Allen is not fantastic backup. So it's not something that matters.
Multiple other guys named Allen.
Yeah, a bunch of Allens that are not Josh, and it doesn't matter. So to get to the sort of Goldilocks here, I think Keenum's too old at this point. Dalton, I think they're.
I had him here. He wasn't my choice.
Yeah, they're out for me. Where I got to just right, I think Kyle Allen makes sense. Stidham makes sense. They're friends with Josh. Obviously, Sam Darnold. For me, my just rights are Marcus Mariota. I think at just hitting 30 years old, there's no value there. I don't think anyone wants him as a bridge necessarily. I think he could just come in and be a backup that has had starting experience, can still be a little bit mobile, just enough steady. He's seen some looks. And the other guy would be Sam Darnold, but I think Sam Darnold's a lot like Mitch Trubisky. I think Bills fans thought Mitch Trubisky was a better backup than he was. I think Mitch Trubisky still is a super erratic, inaccurate quarterback. And I think Sam Darnold's still that too. So it's cool that he was drafted with Josh and a friend and has that high end potential, but I think it would be a very chaotic. You don't want Sam Darnold taking over any type of reps.
No. Super similar. I debated Andy Dalton. He's a name that's out there. I think Mariota is an inspired choice. I think that's really good. I might have done my list like earlier the day when he got released. I didn't think to go back and add him. I think I might have done my list before then. That's a really great choice.
Thank you.
My only difference was I put Taylor Heineke on there. I think Heineke's pretty similar in there. Taylor Heineke's a super sneaky 30. Like, it doesn't seem like he just came out. Like, he floated around a while before he got his chance.
Yeah.
So he's a sneaky 30. I don't think it's crazy Trubisky comes back. I think Trubisky is very likely to be a cap casualty in Pittsburgh. If he is, I think he would then maybe even jump to the top of the list.
Or does he go with Shane
right there?
And Gable?
Sure, absolutely. He could go be Daniel Jones back up in New York. That's a possibility. I think it'd be crazy to think that Darnold isn't a possibility. I think Kyle Allen's a possibility. I think Case Keenum's a possibility. I don't think it'll be Keenum, but Case Keenum's a possibility. I ended up choosing Taylor Heineke, but honestly, if I had a thought of it, I would have picked Mariota. I think that's a great choice.
I know you were in on him last time around too.
Yeah, I think he's that guy, exactly how we described Trubisky. Like, hey, you're not sure if you're going to get another starting spot again. Come be the backup in a really good situation. Look great in some preseason games. Look great in some late season games. Come hang out here, and
a guy people like.
Yes, very likable in every locker room. Very popular around the NFL. Also, I think one thing I learned with Trubisky versus Keenum is I think I want a little bit of athleticism at backup quarterback. That, hey, whether
especially how bad we saw protection, right?
I hope we fix that anyways. But you're never going to have the processing speed of a starting quarterback when you come in. You're going to have to kind of make it up on the go and kind of solve it as you go. So that's why I went with Heineke. Was I wanted that one. Trubisky wasn't released yet, so I'd rather the athleticism of Heineke over a Keenum or a Darnold or a Kyle Allen. But Mariota would check the same boxes.
Brissett was close for me, but I think he'll get that maybe chance to be a bridge.
The Trubisky's deal last year. He'll get that Trubisky deal of like, hey, come to Houston and be the guy that holds the ship afloat until the rookie's ready to play.
Yep.
Okay. So John brings it up there. I debated Gardner Minshew. I think
he'll also be at that high end of backup too. No?
So I didn't, because he looked bad in
He
Philadelphia.
did look bad, but
And Philadelphia had a stacked roster with an awesome offensive line and awesome receivers, and he looked bad. So
that was such a difference of
system
and it hurts to him is a weird,
sure.
and I think that would also probably be weird with Josh. I don't know that it's a fit. I think a team's going to talk themselves into he can be a bridge.
Maybe
Weirdly.
I was weirdly out on him just
Yeah.
because that was such a good situation. I expected him to come in and flourish, and when he came in and looked terrible, I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, well, that's weird." I won't be mad if it's Gardner Minshew because he,
It's fun.
has a great mustache.
Love
and
Bills
wears,
Mafia.
like, cut off jean shorts and goes around shirtless a lot.
And ideally, this person doesn't play at all and just hangs out on the sidelines and is some form of personality that's fun. That's all we care about.
Yeah, for that, you want to know what? I'll throw one out to the Bills Mafia babes. I'm sure they would prefer Gardner Minshew. He's a handsome man. So all right, so there's our list. I ended up going Taylor Heineke. I like Aaron's choice a lot of Marcus Mariota. So let's kind of recap here at quarterback. Aaron had Marcus Mariota. I had Taylor Heineke. At running back, I think I cheated. I think I actually picked Deontay Foreman, even though I on my list I highlighted Alexander Madison. I think Foreman's more realistic. Who was your choice at running back?
I will land on Justin Jackson.
Justin Jackson. I think that's actually a very likely choice. At receiver, I went with Mecole Hardman. You went with Paris Campbell.
Slash
Greg Dortch, waiting for the Dortch to be unleashed. At tight end, I went with Donald Parham, and you went with
at tight end, I went with Dan Arnold.
Dan Arnold, great choice. Yeah. At tight end, I think we had the same 1 and 2. We just flip flopped. You had Jermaine Illuminor. I had Cameron Fleming.
Yep.
At guard, we both were in the Will Hernandez, Nate Davis zone.
Yep.
So I had Nate Davis. I had those two.
I copped out on either give me the musical chairs that falls.
Yeah,
there.
And don't get me wrong. I think both of us, if we found a way to sign Isaac Seumalo or Ben Powers
definitely.
or Dalton Reisner, it'd be awesome. And the one caveat I will give, if we went down the path where I created the 45-50 million in our salary cap spectacular, the one spot I could see us splurging a little bit is in that spot. I think it would be, hey, let's go out and sign Isaac Seumalo and just give him the $12.5, $13 million that he's going to get, and we'll make it work and figure out the cap number in the first year. I think it's going to be at the lower end of that, but that's the one spot that I feel the most confident. I think we're going to sign a starting caliber player. I think we're going to sign someone to start. It might be,
I hope so.
It might be a Will Hernandez at the lower end of that, but I think we're going to sign a guy that as soon as we sign him and see the contract numbers, it's going to be, oh, he's a starter. I think that we're going to see that. That's the one spot I feel the most confident in. Everywhere else,
it's the easiest spot to be a starter on the Bills.
Here's the least competition. Everywhere else, I could take it or leave it, in that we might see it, we might not.
Yeah, and we called this a wish list, but for those that didn't catch the beginning of this necessarily, like, it really was more of finding those Goldilocks, finding a sweet spot tonight of they aren't necessarily the guy we want the most at these positions, but that to us, based on buying in at their stock where they are, based on their age, whatever the number of factors that we put into this, of where are the sweet spots that we can get the most value in this free agency, where we're starting to get up against the cap a little bit, and they have to get creative and find value free agents.
Spot on. We're going to do the same thing next week. Next week is going to be our defensive wish list. And shockingly, that's going to lead right into free agency week.
Crazy.
The next week, free agency starts. So next week is going to be our defensive one. Make sure you're checking out all the other stuff on the network. We brought over your new guy, Joe, just started his new Saturday roundtable on under review that you're going to see there. Come and have fun with me on Friday nights with the Greg Tompsett Sports Show. We've got all kinds of fun going on with Going Deep, the roundup. You got the film room. You've got disguised coverage. The air raid hour. So many good things across the board at Cover One. There's all kinds of options for you. Make sure you're checking out everything that's there. But help us out here. You see the scroll at the bottom of the screen. If you've enjoyed the show tonight, all the work that we put in, I promise we try to do a lot to be able to research and prep for this. Press that like button. It really helps us a lot. Leave us a comment. Let us know. That's my homework for everybody. comment on the show after we post it in the regular comments for the show. Let us know which of our free agents that you like the most, or which one you thought we were crazy for not listing.
Or did we
should
miss
have been our
anyone?
number one pick? Did we miss someone? And then if you've enjoyed some of the other stuff, our producer Chris Kepner, along with Anthony Prohaska and Adam Spencer, have been doing Sabres watch parties on the playback.
That's a
app that
fun
we've
thing
been
to
doing
watch.
there.
Sabres stuff.
Yeah. It wasn't as fun last night, but hopefully it's more fun tomorrow night. So come on over 7:00, playback.tv/cover1. We'll have posts up all over. You're able to come and have some fun. It's been a really good time. They've done a great job with it. Fans have really liked it. I know that the trade deadline hasn't gone quite as well yet. On Friday night for the Greg Tompsett Sports Show, I'm going to have Chad and Anthony from Expected Buffalo on talking about the NHL trade deadline and hopefully some Sabres news that breaks right before then. We'll see how that goes. But ultimately, we appreciate you. The chat was awesome tonight. You guys were fantastic. Make sure you hit that like button on the way out tomorrow, or the way out. We really, really appreciate it. But on behalf of Aaron Quinn, I am Greg Tompsett. You've been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.